Yes, climate in the news, hot topic, because indeed media outlets have a great responsibility in communicating the importance of addressing the climate emergency, not only to enhance public awareness, but also to mobilize for action. So we have now great experts: Amalie Kestler, head of the national desk, Politiken in Denmark, Charlie Phillips, head of the video, The Guardian, and the discussion will be moderated by no less than reporter Amalie Atkin herself, the author and founder of Heated, a daily newsletter dedicated to original accountability reporting and analysis on the climate crisis. So they will discuss together recontextualization, resetting priorities, and the shift on the language and narratives currently employed in the news.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the news panel. My name is Amalie Atkin. I am the author and founder of Heated. It is a newsletter, climate change newsletter based in the United States. It's really my honor and joy to be here today with Charlie Phillips, the head of video for The Guardian, which has really been leading the way in shifting the urgency of climate change coverage in the news media, and Amalie Kestler, who's the head of national desk at Politiken in Denmark, which is really setting an example for integrating climate coverage into all of its different areas of coverage. Both of these people I consider to be really helping us in the news media start to think of climate change not just as a really niche story, like some little science or even just an environment topic, but as a topic that affects every single part of our daily lives and really deserves coverage in every single part of the news stories that we tell every day. So welcome, guys. I'm really happy to have you here. I would love if we could just start this discussion about climate storytelling in the media, which tends to be a controversial topic. Why don't you just let people know a little bit about what your job really looks like on a day-to-day basis? Like, take us into what is it? What do you do? I mean, how are you telling stories on a day-to-day basis? We can start with, let's start with Amalie, and then we'll go to Charlie.
Thank you so much, Emily, and thank you for having me. I'm the head of the national desk at Politiken, and my day is very varied. I lead a team of about 30 journalists writing about everything from education to politics, and quite a few of them about climate change also. So my job is really varied, but I've been leading our refocusing of our climate coverage at Politiken, and we have done a quite intensive work on this the past 3 years in refocusing our climate change coverage. And I'm really happy to be here and to be able to share some of our experiences with you guys.
Thanks, Amalie. Charlie, want to give us your day in the life?
So I'm head of video at The Guardian, so I look after all moving image on and off the Guardian website. So that can be anything from documentaries to news video to culture video to sport video. Everything kind of comes across my desk, and we have a team of about 35 in-house video producers, as well as working with people outside of the building. And some of those stories are on the climate crisis, and some of them aren't, obviously, but ideas around the climate crisis and environmental activists tends to run through a massive amount of everything that we do across all departments, including video.
So one of the ways that I know that both of your news outlets have really tackled the climate crisis and really changed how you cover the climate crisis in the last few years, especially, is the literal number of stories that are published every single day, every single issue. Charlie, you and I were talking about before this panel about how the Guardian at one point had an environmental story every 3 hours.
Every 3 hours. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
we did
which
an
is
audit of our environmental coverage. Yeah, we did an audit of our environmental coverage last year as a kind of, putting a stake in the ground to say, like, we're in this for the long term. And we worked out that it was approximately every 3 hours. And I think you see that when you look at the front page of our website or the front page of the newspaper as well. Like, there's almost always a climate crisis story there, or several climate crisis stories. It's kind of, it's one of the things that we're most impassioned by, and it's one of the things that our readers and audiences want us to cover.
Yeah, and Amalie, you said something similar too, which is that your readers really want to see like a bigger scale of coverage, and that you have facilitated that by making reporters in all, not just in your climate desk, but in throughout the newspaper covering climate. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, definitely. What we did in 2018 was we refocused the climate coverage. Before that time, we were more telling maybe systemic stories, political stories. And we wanted to keep that, but we also had a feeling that we could reach a broader audience and a lot more diverse audience by telling different stories. So we did that by launching a first climate campaign, which was called Our Climate, where we kind of went into our individual lives. We wanted to share hopes and solutions also, but also have the focus on the crisis. So what we've done is we produce a lot more stories and a lot more diverse stories, from what can a single family do to reduce carbon footprint, to the bigger investigative series, to a more consumer journalism, which is now more anti-consumer. We launched our campaign on Black Friday 2018. And that campaign alone was it maybe was about 3 months, I think, and it really shows that we had many readers and we reached many more readers than we did before the change of our coverage. So now we do the systemic political stories, which are really important, but we also do all kinds of different stories. And the writers that were writing about architecture, about food, about our travel section, that we rebranded it to focus more on climate-friendly traveling, things like that. So yes, we broadened the whole scope of the way we were writing about it.
I would like to know from both of you how your readers deal with the fact that you're covering climate change all the time. Because here in the US, where I'm based, we often have this discussion that climate change stories don't get good ratings. They're not good, they're not interesting, or they're not, like, people are not reading them. Or if you do too much, people will tune out. Like, they're not going to pay attention anymore. So how are you balancing all these stories with like actual success of readership? How are you finding your readers' reactions? Charlie?
They really love it. I mean, we do it because it's right, but we also do it because they're interested. I was just looking there, actually. So in 2020, we published 3,000 articles under the environment tag, and we had 100 million readers. So that's a lot, obviously. And they really respond to it. Like, we see really higher than average attention times for any story about the climate crisis. And some of those stories have been some of our biggest articles of the last few years. So Naomi Klein did a big, long read article for us about how party politics or the kind of political movements can interact with direct action activists, and it was really fascinating. And it had one of our longest attention times of the year, and that really goes especially for longer form journalism. So they don't just want to read like anything about the climate crisis; they want to read about it in detail, and they're particularly interested in articles around solutions. So just picking up on what Amalie said there, if we write something about traveling through Europe without using the plane, it'll do really, really well, because people are really eager to be able to help to kind of change their consumer choices, to change their lifestyles. So I think we're quite lucky that we have a big readership who are deeply engaged with this, and they're encouraging us to do more of it.
Amalie, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, we see the same thing. Our readers are very concerned about the climate, and they also do want to read about it. But obviously, we also see that some stories do better than others, because that's what I'm hearing you also saying, that maybe if the story is too technical, that it won't get as many readers. So we try to balance the systemic with the more close to home stories, so to speak. And then obviously, like we've always done, we try to tell the story compelling and interesting. And our experience is that actually climate does a lot better than we initially thought it would. We can see that in the numbers, that our readers do want to read about climate. But it's the same thing, even if you write about other political topics or other topics, people really want to read stuff that they can mirror themselves in. And then sometimes they go really deep into a long read about climate change. But our experience is that our readers do want it, and our younger readers also want to read about climate. We had, the Fridays for Future movement that we covered very closely. And we actually had a parliament election in 2019 where the government made this 70% emission goal and emission cut goal. And that was brought about a really engaging time in Denmark, where young people took to the streets, also obviously the whole world. But it made a difference in Danish politics.
Often what people want to read, though, is not what they need to read about. And I find that that's a really, that's a tough balancing act to do as a journalist, is giving people the news that they want to read versus the news that is really important for them to make decisions in society. And of course, people want to read about, how to travel without a plane or how to reduce their carbon footprint. But when we're talking about the climate crisis, I think it's pretty well known at this point that what needs to happen is a more systemic change to society, and that we have a lot of bad actors in society that if we can change individually all we want, if they continue emitting, polluting, being corrupt, all that kind of stuff, then it doesn't matter what stories we're telling about how to reduce your own carbon footprint, right? So how are you conveying urgency on the systemic level? And what is resonating with people? How are you getting that message across? Either, I mean, we can jump in either one. Charlie, I don't know. Let me start with you.
Yeah. Shall I jump in? So it's a part of the whole of the Guardian's mission to hold power to account. And so that's kind of what we're doing every day, whether it's on the climate crisis or human rights or anything else. And our readers expect that of us. But what tends to be a bit more effective for us is focusing on the things that people can do every day. And I'm not necessarily talking about things like taking the train instead of the plane. I'm kind of talking about what activists are doing, how people can band together on a kind of mass level to influence their governments. And we've really found that focus on activists and activism and what people can do on a kind of local and national level is the thing that really seems to empower our readers the most. Because what we really want to avoid is a sense of hopelessness in our readers, which I think you can get when you've spent years of writing about Trump's lack of climate policies. You don't want people to feel detached from it. You want people to feel a sense of hope, and you want to feel like there is some kind of action they can take. So I'm kind of, in a way, like I'm not totally answering your question, because what I'm saying is we do report on the systemic things. We do report on polluting companies. We do report on leaders with really bad climate policies. But we always want to then develop that into a kind of guide for our readers on how they can join mass activist movements on a kind of, small scale at home, but a kind of big scale in terms of things like the Fridays for Future movement. And that, we just want to give people a sense of hope as well as criticizing those in power. That's what I'm saying.
And I think that you're really your point is really important here, and I think I used to be a political reporter, and you can't choose what your readers want to read. You can't tell them what to read, but what you can do is you can give them what they should be reading, and then try to make it as compelling as possible. And then you can start as a media outlet. You have a responsibility to feed the discussion. We host debates. We write about this all the time, and we write about it from as many angles as we can, in order to get people engaged also. So in that sense, I agree with Charlie. We need to give people hope, but we also definitely need to cut into some of the really tough questions here. And what we did last year was a big investigative campaign on climate credits and climate compensation. And that is one of the ways, and you can say maybe that didn't get as many readers as the one we did on the more consumer individual lives campaign we did, but we feel like both things are very important to keep going at. So we spend a lot of resources on the investigative campaign, and it actually made a difference, and it got politicians discussing about the whole system for climate credit and climate certificates. So in that sense, we just try to do climate journalism as many levels possible to raise awareness and to keep the discussion going. And we believe that is a way to get more people invested in this.
What are you guys no longer doing? Climate change has gone through a lot of different ways to be covered by the media. I know that The Guardian has changed. We mentioned this before. It's changed its language. It's referring to climate change now as a climate crisis, conveying that urgency. Every single time it's mentioned. Politiken has, put its resources all across its newsroom now, no longer just viewing climate change as a environmental niche story, which we talked about. What else have you found like that's not good, that no longer works? Maybe other journalists or storytellers should stop doing this thing. Amalie?
Well, I think what we do is we really work hard to try to use language that is not as systemic as we did before, but that's not the same as not diving into systemic issues. So I would say I think we write more compelling, and maybe before we had more systemic stories that were also systemic in the language. So we try to work with the systemic stories and really try to tell them in the way that we get the systemic story told, but we do it we use cartoons a lot in Politiken, we use our design, we use visuals. So So maybe not as many words, maybe a lot more also emphasis on the visuals. So I think that's the biggest change, because what we did was actually we just write a lot more on this topic from many angles.
Right. You're saying like a bigger focus on really the storytelling aspect, and not just being like, this carbon plan has this in it and it has this in it because the scientists say this. Next paragraph. You know, you're trying to create narratives, whether they be visual, through writing, all that kind of stuff. I totally agree with you that works much better. Charlie, what are you no longer doing?
Yeah. So there's the language thing. Like you mentioned about climate crisis, not climate change. Like we'll also refer to global heating rather than global warming. We'll talk about wildlife rather than biodiversity, climate science denier rather than climate skeptic. So kind of trying to have more like, I suppose, like more aggressive language to show the scale of it. The other thing will be like, if it's like a really like unusually hot day, for example, we, unlike most of the British newspapers, won't do the kind of few water scorcher thing that the tabloids would do, celebrating the fact it's really hot, or even kind of making out that if it's really cold, that's some like freak event. We'll talk about it in relation to the climate crisis, and we'll say like, this is really weird that we have this extreme weather happening here in the UK. This, like, scientists think that this is happening because of this particular phenomenon. And so it's really like avoiding making any climate related freak event out to be like an unusual freak event. It's like part of the system, is what we're expecting to happen. And that I think now is like bedded into the instincts of all of us at The Guardian. It's super important.
Yeah. We just have a few minutes left, and I want to open it up for questions for people. But I also just want to ask you guys really briefly, if you can, if you have like a piece of advice for storytellers working at, you're working in these big newsrooms that have really prioritized climate change. Like, how would you tell maybe other people working in these medias, like, what advice would you give them? Amalie?
I think my advice would be to just attack it from all different angles. Be creative, think about different ways of telling stories, think about what can you do in your travel section, what can you do in your food section, what can you do in your architectural section, your cultural section. Just think it into the whole core of the paper. That for us, that has really been inspiring, and shown that we tell many more diverse stories than we did before.
Charlie, do you have a quick piece, and then we can open it?
Yeah. So from a film and video point of view, I'd say like try and tell your stories through identifiable characters that people will empathize with. We found that really successful with our film and video on this, that if people can see a character on screen who they feel a relationship with and feel is kind of taking the action that you as an audience member would want to take, that can really help. It can make things seem more achievable, and like I said earlier, give that sense of hopefulness.
Great. Okay, so I have a question from the audience. You guys ready? This is from Krishan Arora. Images that you use in the news. So do people still want to see the spectacular images that illustrate the climate crisis, like fires, floods, industrial chimneys, or do they more want to see the hopeful images of where we want to end up? What's resonating more? Anyone feel free to jump in.
Yeah, sure.
Well, maybe I think Charlie will be the right one to start answering this.
Yeah, I'll just be brief. Like, we try and have a mix. That's like the obvious answer. That sometimes you need to shock people sometimes you need to give them some sense of hope and resolution. I don't think you can avoid the shocking things and the shock and awe. Like, I think people do need that. And I think especially in the UK, when we now have severe flooding in multiple places every single year, and people need to see those really shocking images of people like not being able to go back into their homes and having their livelihoods destroyed. You can't just make it seem nice. You need to like get across that it is a really urgent crisis. But like, you kind of do have to do both of them, or like I said earlier, people will just completely lose any sense that there can be a resolution.
Yeah, I agree. I think we saw we felt at some point there was a bit fatigue for those pictures, or like people didn't maybe click as much on those stories as at the other ones. But at the same time, we feel the same. Of course, we have to show them, and we have to show the consequences of the climate crisis. So it's not something that we really it changed the way we show the pictures, because we still do.
Yeah, I mean, from my personal experience, you have different types of readers are compelled by different types of things, and you do have two different realities happening, and which is one is like a big crisis, and one is there is hopeful stuff. So you got to cater to all of your readers, and you have to be honest about the fact that this is a crisis. It might be, you might feel like you're tiring people out with all of the bad news, but this is bad news. The way that I've approached it is just like, it's not. I didn't feel free to jump in. We have about 30 seconds left, but it's not our job to tell you to like try and coddle this for you. It's our job to tell you what the reality is. Do you guys see it?
Yeah, I totally agree, because most of the rest of the media is making it out to be not as big a deal as it really is. And because we're news organizations that care about this, we do need to keep telling the truth.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
It's a really important topic, and we have to tell it as realistically and as truthful as possible. And we try to do that every day.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys both for being a part of this panel. It went super quickly, as we thought it would. I look forward to seeing and watching more of your coverage, and seeing other people, other storytellers mimic the urgency, scale, variety that you guys have shown. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amalie. Bye-bye.